welcome to IDG Talks here at AD University. My name is Anastasia Lavrina, and now I'm joined by an expert from the United States of America, Mr. Eugene Chausovsky, who is a Senior Director at New Lines Institute. More welcome.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. And let me start with a question about the recently held Fourth Russia Global Media Forum, where the President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, praised Donald Trump's contribution to peace and described him as a man of peace. President Donald Trump subsequently shared these remarks, prompting another public message of appreciation from President Aliyev. What does this unusually positive political exchange tell us about the personal and strategic dynamics between the two leaders? And one additional question, can this relationship translate into concrete geopolitical outcomes for the South Caucasus?
As you mentioned, the personal relationship between President Trump and President Aliyev is a good one that's very strong and that's been reaffirmed here. But also, I think, and more importantly, it shows that the U.S. is still very much committed to its relationship with Azerbaijan, with its outreach and with its engagement in the region, as it relates to the Azerbaijan-Armenia peace process, as it relates to U.S. engagement with things like the TRIP corridor and things of that nature. That's important, obviously, because the U.S. obviously has a lot of its attention right now on the Middle East, on the war with Iran, and there's concerns, from several countries or from several different stakeholders over what that would mean for U.S. engagement. But I think in this particular case, it does show that the U.S. is still very much committed to this region.
Yeah, absolutely. That's quite logical. Apart from this, President Ilham Aliyev has repeatedly highlighted President Trump's role in advancing the lasting peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia. We should remember that meeting that was held in Washington on August 8 last year. How important is this direct U.S. engagement at this stage of the negotiations between Yerevan and Baku? And could Washington become the principal external political guarantor of a post-conflict regional order?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very important. Obviously, there's been a lot of progress made between Azerbaijan and Armenia, but it's still not a completely finished process, right? So that is something that it will take, I think, the more external support, especially from the United States, to get that over the finish line. I think there were several challenges or hurdles that have been crossed, most notably Armenia's recent elections, which reaffirmed the commitment to this peace process and to the interconnectivity projects as well. Related to being the main guarantor of the order moving forward from the U.S. standpoint, I think that will be a challenge, both because of U.S., as I mentioned, involvement in other theaters, most notably the Middle East, but also still with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, with the Indo-Pacific, and the fact that there are numerous players outside of the U.S., some on the side of the U.S., some potentially counter, I'm thinking countries like Russia or Iran. So I'm not sure I can say that the U.S. will be the main guarantor, but I think it will be an influential and pivotal actor in that regard.
Eugene, for decades, Russia was a dominating power in the region of the South Caucasus. And even now, Russia is still planning and trying to keep its position in the region. But now we also have the United States of America, Türkiye, European Union, and their willingness to take an active part in the processes taking place in the region of the South Caucasus. More in details about the interest of the United States. Is Washington seeking to fill a geopolitical space created by Russia's declining influence, probably because of the war with Ukraine, or taking into account all other geopolitical processes taking place today around Russia and its stance in the region? Or is a completely new balance of power emerging in the region?
Well, I think both can be the case, right? That the U.S. is trying to, fill, especially with Russia, on the back foot in this particular region. So that presents opportunities not only for the U.S., but also, as you mentioned, the Europeans, Turkey, and they can act in coordination in a lot of these different elements. But the new balance of power is emerging as a result of that, right? And this is, I should note, something that's constantly shifting, right? This is not a static, even if Russia may be, at the disadvantage currently, it has certainly the potential to reassert its position if it so chooses, although Russia has its own significant challenges, as we've been seeing, obviously, with the Ukraine conflict. So it's one that is, I think, a balance of power that's dominated by multiple or shaped by multiple countries, but to the extent that the U.S. can work with partners, not only Azerbaijan, but also those regional, players, I think that will only enhance their position moving forward.
Eugene, let's have a broader look at the situation in the region. We increasingly hear that Azerbaijan discussed not only within the South Caucasus, but as a gateway to Central Asia. C5+1, C6+1 formats are among the interests of Washington. So could deeper U.S. engagement with Azerbaijan form a part of a broader American strategy toward the Central Asia, and what role Azerbaijan particularly can play in this new environment, in this new geopolitical reality?
Absolutely. And I think that is the kind of strategic thinking that's taking place at the Trump administration, right? So in parallel to this engagement with Azerbaijan and Armenia with the peace process, there's also there's been a lot of engagement with Central Asia when it comes to things like critical minerals, when it comes to securing energy supplies, even potentially linking those two regions, through trade, through potentially even pipelines or other forms of trade corridors. There was a recent visit by Senator Daines to not only Azerbaijan but also several countries in Central Asia, and I think that reflects the thinking. This is an interconnected region, one that I think is really important and only enhances the U.S. position if it's dealt with in that regard.
Eugene, another very important element in the bilateral relations between Azerbaijan and the United States is that Section 907, the amendment. And just recently, President Aliyev said that the Section 907 no longer has a practical negative impact under the Trump administration, but that its political and symbolic meaning remains. Given the dramatic transformation of the region since the developments in the beginning of the 19th, and also considering the growing importance of the bilateral relations between Washington and Baku, is there now a realistic political path toward its full repeal by Congress? And what would such a decision signify for U.S.-Azerbaijan relations?
Right. Well, with issues like this, it's difficult to predict specifically because here you're bringing in a lot of different internal political actors, right? Not just the Trump administration, but also, members of Congress. Obviously, we've got midterm elections coming up here in the U.S. that could have an impact. So, difficult to say, what the actual, legal, future will hold on this particular amendment. But certainly, as we've talked about, the broader strategic push is there. And I think there's increasing alignment out of not only the administration, but also of Congress, as I just mentioned, with that senatorial visit, to move it in that direction. I'm sure there will continue to be some technical, legal, and political challenges that will take place, that those will not be completely removed, but I think the overall push is there.
Eugene, speaking about the South Caucasus itself, we cannot ignore the ongoing escalation between Iran, that's bordering Azerbaijan, and the United States of America. How do you assess the situation at the moment?
Sure. So, obviously, we're now basically in a period of re-entering an escalatory environment when it comes to the U.S.-Iran conflict over the last, week or two. I think what this shows is that, once these conflicts began, and you don't have to look too far to see, for example, in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, it's very difficult to bring them to a full-scale peace agreement or even a ceasefire agreement. And what you see is periods of escalation or periods of de-escalation, but one that I think in this case shows that we're not, anywhere close to a full peace agreement. And what that means for U.S. engagement in the region, I think that only increases the importance of countries like Azerbaijan, like the broader Caspian region, both as states that are impacted, obviously very geographically close, but also serve as potential alternatives or supplements to energy trade, to trade overall, as we're seeing the Strait of Hormuz has been, significantly impacted, right? And I think that threat at least is not going to be going away anytime soon. So whether it's for TRIP, for the middle corridor, I think that will make it even more important for the U.S. to stay engaged in this region.
I guess one of the most important events that took place in the region itself is the recently held NATO summit that took place in Ankara, Turkey, with the personal participation of the President of the United States, Donald Trump, bilateral meetings that were held on the sidelines of the summit. And we see the growing tendency in the relations between Turkey and the United States. So how important is Turkey for the United States at the moment, and what should we expect from the upcoming future in the bilateral relations of these two countries?
Very important. I mean, from all of the issues that we've discussed, whether it's the Middle East conflict, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, or even in the direct engagement with the U.S. in the Caucasus, in Central Asia, I think this is an area where Turkey can certainly be complementary. Obviously, Turkey has its own objectives here, but it has been, I think, very broadly aligned with U.S. efforts, and it's helped the U.S. In terms of countering Russia, for example, in this region. Turkey itself has become much more influential. So I think, Turkey's role within NATO, its levels of defense spending, and its overall relationship with the U.S. is a very important one.
Yeah, yes, right. That's absolutely right. But from that bilateral meeting that took place in Ankara recently, Donald Trump spoke about the lifting of the sanctions that had been imposed against Turkey before, and even Turkey's return to the F-35 program. How realistic is that this promise will be implemented in the upcoming future?
Sure. I mean, I think it's definitely realistic, but as what we were talking about with the, congressional amendments and things of that nature, there's going to be various, political, technical, legal issues that could complicate it. But I think also in this case, there's clearly a push for the U.S. to improve that relationship with Turkey and to lift some of those restrictions. What exactly that will look like obviously remains to be seen, but I think the overall direction of that is quite clear.
Well, Eugene, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining IDC Talks today.
All right. Thank you.